The rain was falling hard on the busy city street. Cars moved slowly, horns echoed, and people rushed under umbrellas in the middle of the road. A black luxury car stood still, blocking traffic. Its sleek body shone under the rain. But the engine was dead, silent. Inside sat Vanessa Cole, one of the richest and most powerful CEOs in the city. She tapped her finger impatiently on the steering wheel. Her driver had already tried to restart the car 3 times, but nothing happened. Vanessa stepped out, wearing a tailored coat and high heels, even in the rain. She looked like someone from a magazine cover. People began to notice her, whispering, "That's Vanessa Cole." Her assistant rushed forward with an umbrella, but Vanessa waved her away. She opened the hood herself and stared at the engine like it was an alien machine. "Great," she muttered. "On the one day I'm late for a board meeting." A small crowd gathered, some taking photos, some just curious. Her driver tried again to fix something, but it was useless. A young man from the crowd laughed. "You need a real mechanic, lady?" Vanessa gave a small smirk, apparently. "Those are rare in this weather." That's when David walked by. He was tall, with strong arms and dark skin, wearing old jeans and a shirt with oil stains. In his right hand, he carried a worn-out toolbox. His boots splashed through puddles as he passed the car. He glanced at the engine for only a second. Before walking on, "Hey," the young man in the crowd called. "You a mechanic?" David stopped, turned his head slowly, and nodded. Vanessa crossed her arms, amused. She looked at him from head to toe. He didn't look like someone who could handle a luxury car worth more than most houses. She raised an eyebrow and said, half joking, half mocking, "If you can fix this engine, I'll marry you." The crowd laughed loudly. Some clapped, others shouted, "Go on, man, marry rich." David's face didn't change. He simply looked at her with calm, serious eyes. "I accept," he said quietly. But with a firmness that made the laughter fade for a moment, Vanessa blinked. Caught off guard by his answer, she had expected him to laugh or make a joke back. Instead, David walked past the crowd, straight to the car. Rain dripped from his hair onto the engine as he leaned over to inspect it. The smell of oil and wet metal filled the air. The assistant whispered too. "Vanessa, ma'am, he looks serious." Vanessa tilted her head, studying him. David didn't even look up. He was focused on the machine in front of him. His hands moved with confidence, touching wires, checking bolts. They were rough hands, with small scars and calluses. The kind of hands that had fixed hundreds of engines before. The crowd grew larger, some holding up phones to record. One man whispered, "This guy's crazy if he thinks he can fix that in the rain." Another replied, "Or maybe he's just good." David opened his old toolbox. It wasn't shiny or new. Inside were tools that had clearly been used for years. He picked out a wrench, tested its grip, and began loosening a part of the engine. Water ran down his arm, soaking his sleeve. Vanessa watched. A small spark of curiosity replacing her earlier mockery. The wind blew harder, sending drops of rain into everyone's faces. But David kept working. He didn't look up, didn't talk, didn't even notice the phones recording him. It was as if the entire world didn't exist. The engine mattered. Vanessa found herself stepping closer without even realizing it. From this distance, she could see the focus in his eyes. There was no panic, no rush, only precision. Something about that calm confidence made her heartbeat slow down. "Do you know what you're doing?" she asked, her voice softer now. David replied without looking at her, "Engines are honest, ma'am. They tell you what's wrong if you listen." It was such a strange thing to say that she didn't answer. Instead, she just watched him work. Minutes passed. David's fingers moved like he was playing a piano, each motion careful and exact. The rain washed the grease from his skin, but he didn't stop. Finally, he reached deep into the engine and tightened something with one strong twist. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. David looked at the driver and said, "Try it." Now, the driver turned the key. The car gave a weak cough, but didn't start. Some people laughed again, shaking their heads. Vanessa folded her arms, hiding her disappointment. But David didn't stop. He took a deep breath, checked something else, and made another adjustment. Then, without warning, he dropped a small bolt. It fell into the narrow gap inside the engine with a metallic clink. Gasps spread through the crowd. Vanessa's eyes widened. If that bolt got stuck, the repair would fail. David stood still for a moment, the rain running down his face. Then, slowly, he reached in, his fingers moving carefully in the tight space. The street was silent, except for the rain. Finally, his hand came back out, holding the missing bolt. He placed it back where it belonged, his expression unreadable. Vanessa didn't know why, but her heart was now beating faster. Something told her this man wasn't finished yet. The crowd's laughter had faded, replaced by a strange tension. Rain still dripped from the edges of umbrellas, but no one moved away. All eyes were fixed on David, the man who had just caught the lost bolt, as if it was nothing. He didn't rush, he didn't even seem worried. Instead, he cleaned the bolt with his sleeve, then fixed it back into place with quiet care. Vanessa watched every movement. She was used to seeing mechanics in her company's garages fast, loud, and always in a hurry. But this man worked differently. His touch was gentle but firm, like he understood the car was more than just metal and wires. "Where did you learn to do this?" she finally asked. David didn't look at her, still focused on the machine. "My father," he replied simply, tightening another part. He could fix anything from tractors to fishing boats. There was a small pause before he added, "He said engines talk. You just have to listen." Vanessa tilted her head. It sounded poetic, almost ridiculous, but looking at him, she knew he believed it. She found herself wondering what kind of life he had lived. This man didn't dress for success, didn't have expensive tools, yet here he was, handling a machine that cost more than most houses, like it was a familiar friend. David reached into his old, battered toolbox again. Inside were tools of all shapes, some polished smooth from years of use. He picked out a thin screwdriver, checked the tip, and started adjusting a small panel. The rain ran down his jaw, dripping onto the silver metal. His movements were slow, careful, almost like a surgeon. The driver, still sitting inside, glanced nervously at Vanessa. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" he whispered. Vanessa didn't answer. She couldn't. Something about watching this man work was holding her in place. It wasn't just skill. It was respect. Respect for the machine. Respect for the craft. David leaned in deeper, his shoulders blocking part of the engine from view. A man from the crowd shouted, "Hey, hurry up! We want to see if the magic man can really do it." David ignored him. He didn't respond to jokes, didn't seem to care about the recording phones. It was as if the car and he were alone, having a silent conversation. Vanessa's mind drifted. She remembered her own father. He was the founder of her company. He always told her that real leaders respect the workers who keep the wheels turning. Looking at David, she thought he'd probably like this man. The sound of a small click brought her back. David had removed a wet, burnt wire and replaced it with a spare from his bag. It was an old part, not shiny, but strong. He secured it, then wiped his hands on a rag. "Try it now," he said again, his voice calm but certain. The driver turned the key. The car gave a louder cough this time, then went quiet again. Few people in the crowd chuckled, whispering, close, but not enough. Vanessa's lips tightened, but she didn't speak. She wanted to see what he would do next. David didn't frown. Didn't sigh. He just nodded to himself. "Almost there," he murmured. He took out a small flashlight, shone it deep inside the engine, and adjusted something tiny. It was so Small, most people wouldn't even notice it, but when he was done, he stepped back. Motioning to the driver once more, he said. The driver turned the key again. This time, the car gave a deep, strong growl before settling into a smooth purr. The engine's hum filled the air. Warm and steady, the crowd gasped. Some clapped, a few even whistled. Vanessa's eyes widened. Her car was alive again. David closed the hood gently. Not slamming it like most mechanics did, he picked up his tools, closed his old box, and slung it in his hand. No smile, no boast, just quiet satisfaction. You actually did it, Vanessa said softly. David nodded once. I said I would. Her assistant looked between them, still trying to understand what had just happened. The young man in the crowd, who had laughed earlier, now muttered, "Guess the joke's on us." Some people began to walk away, but many stayed, sensing there was more to see. Vanessa stepped closer to David. "You could work for me, you know," she said. Half teasing, half serious. David shook his head. "I work for the people, not the rich." Her mouth fell slightly open, not because she was offended, but because no one ever said that to her face. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The street smelled of wet asphalt and warm engine oil. David turned to leave, toolbox in hand. But something in Vanessa's chest felt strange, like letting him walk away would be a mistake. For the first time that day, she wasn't thinking about her meeting, her company, or her schedule. She was thinking about him, and somehow she knew this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. David walked away from the car, the sound of the engine still humming behind him. The crowd was slowly breaking apart, some still whispering about what they had just seen. Vanessa stayed where she was, one hand on the hood of her now perfectly running luxury car. Her heart was still racing, not from the repair, but from the strange, quiet dignity in that man's eyes. She had met hundreds of men in her life, business partners, engineers, investors. They were always eager to impress her, always looking for an advantage. But David, he had walked away without even asking for payment, without taking a single picture, without boasting about fixing a machine worth more than his home. Her assistant stepped closer, holding the umbrella over her. "Ma'am, we should go. You have the quarterly meeting," and Vanessa cut her off. 5 minutes. I know. But instead of getting into the car, she found herself looking at David. He was already halfway down the street, toolbox in hand, boots splashing in shallow puddles. Something in her didn't want this to end here. She called out, "Hey." David stopped and turned, the rain still falling lightly on his shoulders. "Don't you want your reward?" she asked, her tone playful but her eyes searching. The crowd chuckled, remembering her earlier marriage challenge. David's face stayed calm. "I didn't do it for that," he said. Then he gave a small nod and turned again to leave. Vanessa stood there for a moment, unsure why she felt disappointed. Her driver opened the car door, waiting for her to get in. She did, but her mind wasn't on the meeting anymore. David walked through narrow back streets, his mind already moving to the next job. His workshop was small, with faded paint on the sign and a tin roof that leaked during heavy rain. Inside, it smelled of oil, old tires, and warm tea from the kettle in the corner. He set down his toolbox, took off his wet shirt, and hung it by the heater, fixing a high-end engine. Like that wasn't new for him, but the look in Vanessa's eyes, that was different. He had seen many rich people treat him as invisible. Some would toss him a few bills without even looking at him. Others would question his skills before he even touched their car. But she, despite her initial mocking, had actually watched him work, and that, strangely, stayed in his mind. Back at her office, Vanessa sat at the head of the meeting table. Her executives spoke about profits and new investments, but their voices sounded far away. All she could see in her mind was the image of David's rough, scarred hands moving with absolute precision. She remembered his words, "Engines are honest. They tell you what's wrong if you listen." It was such a simple line, yet it felt like something her father might have said. And she couldn't explain why it mattered so much. 2 days passed. The city was sunny now, the streets busy with weekend life. David was under a truck in his workshop, tightening bolts. He heard the sound of an expensive engine outside, smooth, powerful, when he rolled out from under the truck. There she was, Vanessa, standing in the doorway. No assistants, no bodyguards. No expensive coat, just jeans, a white shirt, and her hair pulled back. "You found me," David said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I asked around." She replied with a small smile. "I came to thank you properly," she added. "You already did when you drove away," David said, turning back to his tools. But Vanessa didn't leave. She walked around the small workshop, looking at the shelves lined with old parts, the faded posters on the walls, the kettle in the corner, the single workbench. "You could be working in one of the best garages in the country," she said. David looked at her and "Give up this." He gestured around, not with pride, but with a kind of quiet belonging. "You turned down a job offer without even hearing the pay," Vanessa said, almost laughing. "I don't measure life by pay," David replied. "Then what do you measure it by?" she asked, leaning against the workbench. David paused for a moment, then said, "By how many things I can fix before they're gone forever." Vanessa didn't know why, but her chest felt tight hearing that. For years, she had lived in a world where everything had a price tag, and here was a man who valued something you couldn't buy. She wanted to say more, but her phone buzzed, her assistant calling again. Vanessa glanced at the screen, sighed, and silenced it. For the first time in a long while, she didn't care about the schedule. She cared about the conversation. When she finally left the workshop, David went back to work. But there was a small smile on his face now. Something told him this wasn't over. Vanessa wasn't the type of woman to simply say thank you and disappear, and deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted her toy. It was late afternoon when Vanessa's phone buzzed again. Her assistant's voice came through quickly. "Ma'am, the investors from New York just landed early. They'll be at your office in 20 minutes. Vanessa glanced at the clock, then at the road ahead. Her driver was already weaving through traffic, the city lights starting to glow in the early evening. They passed a row of old workshops, their signs faded from years of sun and rain, and there's for a moment Vanessa saw him again. David bent over the hood of a van, his sleeves rolled up, sweat and oil on his skin. Her eyes lingered until the driver's voice broke through. "Should I keep going, ma'am?" She didn't answer right away. Something in her chest told her she couldn't just pass by this time. "Stop," she said firmly. The driver pulled over, confused. Vanessa stepped out, the sound of engines and hammers echoing around the street. David looked up when he saw her, surprised. "You again?" he said with a small smile, wiping his hands. "Me again," she replied, walking closer. "I have a meeting in 18 minutes, she said, glancing at her watch. "But my car started making a noise on the way here." David raised an eyebrow. "Noise? Or excuse?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "Maybe both." He shook his head, amused, and gestured for her to bring the car over. As her driver parked near the open bay, David leaned in to listen to the engine, his ear close to the hum, his fingers feeling the vibration. "It's not serious," he said after a moment, "but it needs tightening before it becomes serious." Vanessa watched as he pulled a small wrench from his toolbox. His hands moved quickly, now faster than the first time she had seen him. There was no crowd today, no phones recording, just the two of them. And yet, she could feel the same energy, the quiet confidence, the focus. The way he worked made time feel slower. But she knew every second counted. 17 minutes. She reminded him. "Plenty of time," David said, without looking up. "You don't know my world," she replied. He glanced at her then. "Just for a moment, I don't want to," he said simply. She blinked, unsure if he was joking. But before she could ask, he finished the adjustment, closed the hood gently, and stepped back there, he said. No more noise. Vanessa crossed her arms, just like that. Just like that, he repeated. Her driver started the car. The sound was smooth. No rattle, no uneven hum. David wiped his hands and began packing his tools. Vanessa stood still, watching him. She had met people who could work fast and people who could work well, but this man could do both without breaking a sweat. You should be in a high-end garage with a big team, not fixing cars in the rain, she said. David zipped up his toolbox and looked at her. And you should be in your meeting, he replied. His words were simple, but they carried something else, something unspoken. Why do you keep turning down my offers? She asked. David paused, then shrugged. Because your world would change me, he said, and I like who I am for a moment. Vanessa didn't know what to say. People usually wanted to be part of her world. They fought for her attention, for her approval, but David seemed to value something far greater, and that made her feel both frustrated and intrigued. 16 minutes, her driver reminded, his voice tense. Vanessa sighed and stepped toward the car. But just as she was about to get in, she turned. Back, David, she said. One day, I'm going to find something you can't fix. He gave a faint smile. Then I'll fix it anyway. She got into the car, the engine purring as they pulled away. David stood in the doorway of his workshop, watching until her car disappeared into the traffic. Back in the car, Vanessa's thoughts were a mess. Her assistant was talking about presentation slides and investor questions. But all she could hear in her mind was David's calm voice, and I like who I am. It wasn't arrogance. With certainty, and in her high-rise world of deals and deadlines. Certainty was rare. She realized then that this wasn't just about an engine. This was about a man who couldn't be bought, and deep down, she wasn't sure if she wanted to change that. Meanwhile, in his small workshop, David poured himself a cup of tea. He had no idea why the CEO of a massive company kept showing up in his life. But he knew one thing. Every time she left, something in him felt unsettled, like she was a puzzle he hadn't figured out yet. And the strangest part? He didn't mind taking his time. 3 days passed since Vanessa had stopped at David's workshop. Her life returned to its usual rhythm: meetings, business calls, long dinners with investors. But every so often, her mind drifted back to the man with the old toolbox and calm eyes. She remembered the first time they met, in the pouring rain. Her own words echoed in her head. If you can fix this engine, I'll marry you. She had meant it as a joke, yet now she wasn't laughing. It was Saturday morning when Vanessa made a decision. She told her driver to take a different route straight to the row of old workshops. When she arrived, David was outside, rolling a heavy tire toward the open bay. He glanced up, slightly surprised, but not overly so. Back again? He asked, setting the tire down. Back again, she replied with a faint smile. David wiped his hands on a rag. Car trouble? No, Vanessa said. Not today. He raised an eyebrow. Then why are you here? To talk, she answered simply. David leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms. You've got people waiting for you somewhere, I'm sure. He said, yes, but they can wait, she replied. There was a quiet challenge in her tone, like she was daring him to send her away. Instead, he motioned for her to sit on an old wooden stool. She hesitated, looking at the worn seat, but then sat anyway. They spoke about small things at first: traffic, weather, the price of fuel. Then Vanessa asked, do you ever get tired of it? Fixing cars all day? David shook his head. No. Every problem is different. Every solution teaches me something new. She studied him, trying to understand how someone could be content with so little. You know, Vanessa said after a pause the first day we met, you didn't hesitate. You just said I accept. David gave a small smile. You dared me. I don't walk away from challenges, but you didn't want anything in return, she said, leaning forward. I wanted the car to work. That was enough, he replied. Vanessa looked down for a moment, her voice softer now. In my world, no one does anything for nothing. There's always a price. David's expression didn't change. Maybe that's why your world feels so empty. The words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the business deals, the contracts, the endless exchanges of money for favors. When was the last time someone had done something for her without expecting something back? She couldn't remember. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the workshop filling the air. David poured 2 cups of tea from the kettle in the corner. Vanessa took hers carefully. It wasn't in fine china, just a plain old mug, yet somehow it felt warmer than anything she had in her penthouse. You could have taken my job offer, she said after a sip. You could be in a place with better pay, better tools. David shook his head. And lose my freedom. No, thank you. She looked at him, confused. Freedom? I work for myself, he said. I choose my hours, my clients, my prices. No one tells me who to serve or how fast to work. That's freedom. Vanessa stared at him because in her world, freedom meant money. But for him, it meant something entirely different. After a while, Vanessa stood to leave. As she reached the doorway, she turned back. You know, that joke I made the first day about marrying you if you fixed the engine, she began. David smirked. Yeah, I remember. It wasn't fair, she said softly. You took it seriously. Even when I didn't. David stepped closer. Meeting her gaze, I take my words seriously, even if other people don't. For a moment, they stood there in silence. The air between them, thick with something unspoken. Outside, her driver waited patiently. Vanessa got into the car, but her mind stayed in that workshop. It wasn't just about admiration anymore. She was beginning to feel something else, something that scared her. Because David wasn't chasing her wealth, her beauty, or her power. And that made him more dangerous to her heart than anyone she had ever met. Back inside, David watched her car drive away. He didn't know why she kept coming back. He told himself it was curiosity on her part. But deep down, he knew there was more. And if he was honest, he didn't mind. It was early evening, and the sun was dipping behind the rooftops. David was in his workshop, tightening the last bolt on an old pickup truck. The radio played softly in the background, a slow blues song filling the air. He was just about to close up for the night when he heard the sound of a luxury car pulling up outside. It wasn't unusual. Rich clients sometimes found their way to him. But when he wiped his hands and stepped to the doorway, his eyes narrowed slightly. It wasn't just any car, it was her car. Vanessa stepped out, not in her usual tailored suit, but in simple jeans and a light sweater. Her hair was loose, moving with the breeze. And for the first time since he'd met her, she looked almost ordinary. Evening, she said, with a faint smile. Evening, he replied. Watching her closely, car trouble again. No, she said, shaking her head. I just wanted to talk. David leaned against the doorway, crossing his arms. Talk. Yes, she said, walking into the workshop without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the shelves of old parts, the faded posters, the smell of oil and metal mixed with fresh tea. Everything about this place was so different from her glass and steel office, yet somehow it felt warmer, safer. David followed her inside, curious but cautious. So, you left your world to visit mine, he said. Vanessa smiled slightly. Something like that? She sat on the same old stool she had used before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound coming from the ticking of a wall clock. Finally, Vanessa said, I've been thinking about what you said. About freedom. David raised an eyebrow, and, "I'm not sure I've ever had it," she admitted quietly. Her voice wasn't the confident tone of a COO, it was softer, almost fragile. David didn't rush to answer. Instead, he poured 2 cups of tea, handed one to her, and took a seat across from her. "Freedom isn't given," he said, "it's taken. And sometimes it costs more than money." She looked at him, trying to understand. "You're not afraid of losing what you have?" She asked. "I've lost things before," he replied. "I survived." They sat there for a long moment. Sipping tea, Vanessa felt something in the quiet that she rarely felt in her high-rise life. No pressure, no performance, no one judging her every move. She could just be, you know? David said after a while, "Most people who come here want something from me, cheap repairs, a favor, a discount." Vanessa tilted her head. "And what do you think I want?" He studied her for a moment before answering, "I think you're still figuring that out." Her lips curved into a small smile, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of truth. He was right. She didn't fully understand why she kept coming back. Only that something about him drew her in, and it wasn't just his skill with engines. "I have something to show you," she said suddenly. David frowned slightly. "Now?" "Yes, now," she said, standing. "Come with me." David hesitated, glancing at the unfinished workbench. But there was something in her tone, something that made him curious. He grabbed his jacket and locked up the workshop. They got into her car, and the city lights flashed across their faces as they drove. Vanessa didn't say where they were going. She just drove in silence, her hands steady on the wheel. Finally, they reached a massive warehouse on the edge of the city. The kind of place you'd expect to be abandoned, dark, silent. But when she unlocked the door and switched on the lights, David froze. Inside were rows of classic cars restored, polished, shining like jewels. "Your collection?" David asked quietly. "No," Vanessa said, walking forward. "My father's." David followed, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. She stopped in front of a half-finished Project Tan old muscle car covered in dust. "He started this one before he died," she said softly, "but no one's touched it since. I couldn't trust anyone with it." David looked at the car, then at her. "You trust me," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Vanessa met his eyes. "I do." The moment hung between them, heavy but warm. David stepped closer to the car, running his hand over the hood. "This isn't just a car," he said quietly. "This is a memory." Vanessa swallowed, her voice trembling just a little. "That's why I want you to be the one to finish it." David turned to her, his expression unreadable. "That's not a small job," he said. "I know," she replied, "and I'm not paying you for it." David's brows lifted. "Not paying me?" "No," Vanessa said, shaking her head. "This isn't about money. It's something else." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. David could see it in her eyes. This wasn't business. This wasn't a deal. It was trust, and maybe something more. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll do it," he said. Vanessa let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. And for the first time since they met, her smile wasn't guarded, was real. Weeks passed. Every evening, after finishing his work at the workshop, David would head to the warehouse. The old muscle car waited for him there. It was dusty, rusty in some places, and the engine hadn't breathed in years. But to David, it was more than metal. It was a promise. Vanessa came often, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just sitting nearby. She didn't interfere, didn't rush him. She watched him work with the same calm focus he had shown in the rain that first day. The sound of tools, the smell of oil, the gentle rhythm of his hands, it became their quiet routine. One night, Vanessa stood beside the car while David worked under the hood. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "My father used to say, a man's worth isn't in how much money he makes, but in what he leaves behind." David glanced up briefly. Smart man, she smiled faintly. I think he would have liked you. They didn't speak much after that, but in the silence, something had shifted deeper, warmer, more certain. Finally, after almost a month, David tightened the last bolt and stepped back. The car was reborn paint gleaming, chrome shining, the engine polished like new. Vanessa stared at it, her eyes wide. It's beautiful, she whispered. David gave a small nod. It's ready. He opened the driver's door for her. Go on, he said. Start it. Vanessa slid into the seat, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned the key. The engine roared. To life, deep and powerful. The sound filled the warehouse, bouncing off the walls. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't heard that sound since her father was alive. She stepped out of the car, looking at David. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. You already did, he replied, wiping his hands. No, she shook her head. This is more than just fixing an engine. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. David didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with that same steady calm she had seen the first day. Engines are honest, he said. But so are people if you listen. Vanessa took a step closer. You remember what I said the first time we met? David gave a faint smirk. Something about marriage. She laughed softly. Yes. And I meant it as a joke back then, and now? He asked, watching her closely. She hesitated, her voice dropping. Now, I'm not so sure it was a joke. The air between them seemed to grow heavier. David didn't move, didn't speak. He just studied her face, trying to see if she was serious. She took a breath. You're the only person I've met who's never wanted anything from me except honesty. That's because honesty is worth more than money, he replied. Vanessa smiled faintly. Then maybe I should make good on that promise, she said, her tone light but her eyes steady. David tilted his head. You're serious? As serious as you were in the rain, she said. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then David stepped forward, closing the distance between them. I'm not a rich man, he said. I know. Vanessa replied. I don't have a penthouse or a fleet of cars. He continued. I don't need them, she said. David's eyes softened. I won't marry someone because of a challenge, he said slowly. Vanessa's smile widened. Then don't marry me because you want to. It was the first time in years that David felt truly caught off guard. He looked at her, this woman from a world so far from his own, and saw something real in her. Eyes, not power, not pride, but something simple, and for David, simple was everything. I'll think about it, he said finally. Vanessa laughed softly. I suppose that's fair. Weeks later, the city saw something strange. A luxury car parked outside a small workshop. Inside, Vanessa sat on that same old stool, sipping tea while David fixed a customer's truck. They weren't married, not yet, but the bond between them was clear. Some things don't need a rush, just like a good engine. They need care, patience, and the right hands. And maybe, just maybe, one day, the joke that started in the rain would end with a promise that lasted forever.